Tom Browning and I are here at the ballpark, engaged in what is one of his most favorite activities, and we are here courtesy of a crew, a splendid Cincinnati area company that's global in nature and is fractionalizing real estate in a way that's never been done before. And on behalf of a crew, we have some questions for Mr. Tom Browning. And Tom, bear with me. This question might have several sentences in it.
Okay.
First, at 11:58 on September 16th in the year 1988, an event occurred which many believe is the greatest moment in the history of the Cincinnati Reds, which team has been operational now for 153 years. That was the minute that you completed your perfect game against those nasty Los Angeles Dodgers. You were kind of ticked off at them to begin with, but how did you feel at that moment when you had accomplished the perfect game? And just to remind you, yours was the 17th perfect game in all of Major League Baseball history, and you wouldn't have calculated this at that time. There had been 375,000 times that a perfect game could have been thrown, but only 17, and those numbers underscore the extent to which your accomplishment was by definition extraordinary. How did it feel?
Well, I've talked about it before. You never go into a game hoping to throw a perfect game. A shutout, I obviously, when I towed the rubber, my intentions were to go 9 innings and hopefully throw a shutout. But worst case scenario, we win the ball game and I'm able to go 9, which didn't happen but 10% of the time. And I remember that vividly because I had retired the last 11 hitters I faced in LA. I pitched against the Dodgers his previous start and I retired the last 11. I got beat 2-1.
And the same pitcher. Who
Correct. Timmy Belcher hit a 2-run homer off me and I got beat 2-1.
We were kind of annoyed when he hit that homer.
Yeah, not as bad as I was.
That's
Pete,
not the point, though.
It was an 0-2 pitch and Pete thought it was too good a pitch. I said it was on his shoe tops and he scooped it out. So, but anyway, they came back into town and we were still in the pennant race. We were still like 6 games out, even though there was only maybe 2 weeks of the season left. But because we were still mathematically in it, and I grew up a Reds fan my whole life, and I grew up a Dodger hater, so I didn't need any extra motivation to go against the Dodgers and Tommy Lasorda. So it was just because we were still in the pennant race and it was against the Dodgers. I didn't need any extra motivation. It just worked out that way where nobody decided to hit that game, whatever, I don't know.
Well, the moment that the game completed, apparently your teammates understood the importance of what you had accomplished because they were all over you. There must have been a couple thousand pounds on your back.
Oh, easily.
How did that feel?
Well, I remember high-fiving Jeff Reed, the catcher of the game. Pretty excited about what I did because I gave it a little bit of saw, whatever. And then I high-fived Jeff Reed, and I turned around, and Ronnie Oster went to hug me, but instead he hit me in the mouth. And he busted my lip wide open. And he was on the bottom of the pile with me. And while we're celebrating down there, he says, "Hey, man, you're bleeding." I said, "Yeah, because you just punched me in the mouth." Well, I didn't mean to, whatever. I said, "Well, get these guys off because it's kind of getting heavy now." So, but that I thought, I'll be honest, I had an out-of-body experience after that. When they lifted me up onto their shoulders, I felt like I got lifted up even higher. And I was looking down on the whole scene. It was really kind of cool.
Have you ever had an out-of-body experience since then?
No,
or because of
not before or after. No. They might have situations where, it was maybe somebody saying, "Hey, pay attention," but this was an out-of-body experience where I actually could see the guys lifting me up from the pile. So
Interesting. Well, listen, all events in life occur in some context, and that game that was scheduled to start on time was rain delayed, and you took to the mound at 10 o'clock. So it was an hour and 58-minute game. Why so short? Because there were only 27 batters on
one side,
the other side. And what happened earlier that day? It was supposed to start at 8.
Jack. Okay. All right. Well, at 9 o'clock, September 16th, the morning of this perfect game, my wife comes in and at 9 o'clock and says, "Hey, are you going to clean the garage today?" I said, "Well, I'm pitching today." And she says, "Well, if you'd get your ass out of bed and do something around here, maybe you'd pitch better." So I got out of bed eventually. I don't know if I got out of bed right then, but I remember at noon I was cutting up some watermelon for lunch, and she came in and said, "You know, you're not going to the ballpark for a couple more hours. Can you get to that garage?" or whatever she said. And I said, "No, I'm pitching today." And she just kind of kept hammering, so I left. I went to the ballpark, and I was usually at the ballpark by 2:30 because I like to run the streets, for my long distance running. But that day I was there at 1:15 because I just didn't want to hear her nagging at me because I was, So ended up, we started the game at 10 o'clock and it got done right before midnight. And Billy Cunningham back then had an evening show. So he calls me at like 1 o'clock in the morning about the perfect game, and he ends up calling my wife too, because her best friend lived across the street from us. She called her like the 6th inning and said, "Hey, are you listening to the game?" And she said no, so she must have been really pissed off at me. So anyway, are you listening to the game? So she turned the game on and found out what was going on, and she turned it off right away. Turned it off because she didn't want to jinx me. So anyway, Cunningham calls and we make up over the phone, kind of thing. I get home at like 3 in the morning. I had a buddy of mine from Japan, Bill Gullickson, who got traded to, or he ended up going signing over to play in Japan. He calls me at like 5 in the morning. I do remember taking our last drink of beer at 8 o'clock the next morning. So, but I mean, to make up over the phone, over the radio with Billy Cunningham was weird. So,
Tom, you departed because you were annoyed, but my recollection is that, according to you, you told her, she kept pressing you to do the garage, and you, of course, declined, as you just indicated, and then you said, "Well, the other players don't do this, so why do I have to do it? They don't do it." And this was not in the more recent days of big bucks. This is 1988, paid well, of course, but they were able to pay somebody to come do their garage, and apparently her reply to you was, "Not in our house. You do it."
She made sure of it. I did. I ended up cleaning it, but it took me a couple days. So, yeah, she kept me grounded. She was my best critic. She'd tell me how horseshit I was, and there were certain days where I didn't pitch very well. And
Tom, as you know, people have talked to you, with you about this for the last 34 years, and it's obviously become an integral part of your life. You're only 62, so you've got 38 years to go, and you're going to continue to hear about it. But it's interesting how these moments in history influence people, many people, potentially millions of people beyond those in your immediate circle. A couple weeks ago, I raised your perfect game with Dr. Peter Stern, the world famous hand surgeon, and so I asked him, "Where were you that night?" There's certain moments in history where one remembers or one inquires.
Is he a local guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he's the guy that flies around the world teaching hand surgery, but this is a random conversation just a few weeks ago, and I was somewhat surprised to hear him say, something to the effect of, oh yeah, I was at the hospital until about 10:30, and of course when I got into my car to drive home, I immediately turned on the Reds game. He's telling me about September 16th, 1988, a couple weeks ago. And he said, I was so gripped by what Tom was doing that I pulled off the road, found a spot where I could sit for the next 45 minutes because I wanted to soak up and feel and be part of that what turned out to be that historic moment. So that's just a conversation that happened to happen recently, but it speaks to the extent to which historic sporting events or historic events in life resonate with the populace and gives us something to care about and be enthused about. What's it been like you for the 34 years since?
I'll be honest, it's been pretty awesome. It certainly opened up a lot of local doors for me. You know, the moniker Mr. Perfect is probably not the most easiest moniker to live with. You know, my wife said you were perfect for an hour and 52 minutes of your life. I replied, well, we have 5 children, so there's another 10 minutes. But to be honest, I never ever, you know, and I've talked about it before, you never ever go into a game thinking of, I want to throw a perfect game kind of thing, or even a no-hitter for that matter. At least I never did. I was hoping to maybe throw a shutout, you know, throw a complete game kind of thing. Those were kind of my goals when I was a pitcher. One was to make sure we win the ball game, but you know, and I'll be honest, that year Ronnie Robinson, I don't know if a lot of you remember, but he actually he got 2 outs into the 9th inning with a perfect game as well. Ended up giving up a base hit to Wallace Johnson. So we were and I took a no-hitter in the 9th inning earlier that year in San Diego, but I had walked Tony Gwynn 3 times, so I didn't really consider it a no-hitter because the best hitter in baseball I walked 3 times, and he ended up breaking it up in the 9th inning. That was early in May. So we had been through kind of a couple no-hitters where, you know, you want your guys on the bench to be quiet and not say anything and don't touch it kind of thing. So when this came about in September, I remember walking into the dugout, and it was like Moses parting the Red Sea because nobody wanted to touch you. You know, you walk in and they just kind of peel off, you know, and you're like, hey, I'd just like to have a conversation with somebody, you know, knowing what was going on. But we were semi-rehearsed because I remember Dibble and Charlton, they were our bullpen guys, and Griffey would not let them leave to go in the clubhouse to get their cleats on, you know, because usually they left about the 5th inning, went and got their cleats on and came out to the dugout, whatever, but Griff wouldn't even let them leave because of that. So, but
Tom, that was obviously September of '88. 25 months later, in October of 1990, you all sealed a World Series victory against the Oakland A's.
Mighty Oakland A's.
The team that was expected to beat the Reds in 1990.
In 4 straight.
In 4 straight, notwithstanding the fact that you had one of the great managers of baseball history on your side.
Right man, right time.
In his first year with the Reds. And
okay, what did Sparky do his first year with the Reds? Do you recall? 1970, correct?
They won.
And who did they give credit to? Dave Bristol, because he had him before that. And then Lou wins in 1990. And who do they give? Well, I don't know if they gave total credit to Pete, but they gave him some credit because he brought a lot of us guys up. Now, Jack, if I can tell one story, 1990. Okay, Pete had been kicked out he got kicked out of baseball in 1989. Obviously August, because I remember coming back and whatever. Tommy Helms took over. So Pete was kind of relegated to do whatever he did in Plant City. He lived in Plant City at the time, or he had a house down there. He decides to take up the game of golf. I'm at a place called Walden Ponds, which is where he lived at. We used to go trailing behind his house in our four-wheeler. So anyway, he takes up the game of golf, and I see him one day, and he says, "Hey, you want to play golf tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure." So I had a buddy of mine that name is Jeff Henry, came down from Cincinnati, went down. He'd been going with me to spring training for a few years. We go down there, and I said, "Hey, man, we're playing golf with Pete tomorrow." So we meet at Walden Lakes, and we're getting ready to tee off. And we only had 3, so they put another guy with us, a guy named Steve Cunningham from South Carolina, became a very good friend of mine. So we're playing golf, and we get to the 8th hole. And the 8th hole is the tee box, and the 8th hole runs along the road into the Plant City. And my buddy Jeff and I are on the front of the tee, and it was recessed by palmetto bushes, so you can't see the tee box except the front. So Jeff and I are sitting there talking, waiting for the people in the middle of the fairway to clear so we can hit. About that time, Piniella comes by, and he sees me, and he stops. He gets out of his car, walks all the way up to the tee box, and he sees me and my buddy Jeff, and then he turns and he sees Pete Rose and my buddy Steve Cunningham. And if there was anywhere in the world I wanted to be, it wasn't there. I mean, I could feel the tension. I could just feel the uncomfortability of being there. And then Lou said, "Hey, Pete, nice to see you. Maybe sometime I can sit down with you and talk to you about your team." And that's how he diffused it. So Lou was awesome. Pete was awesome, but Lou was just as awesome. So.
Well, recall when Lou showed up at the beginning of the 1990 season, he sat you and your
He sat us all down. They ended up they ended the lockout. We go to Plant City Clubhouse. We all gathered in there, and Lou gets together with his coaches. And he has this little speech, and he introduces all his coaches. And the last thing he says was, "I'm here to win too, so I don't care if you like me." And we walked out. Okay, and in spring training, there's 2 things guaranteed we do every day. One is PFP, which is pitchers fielding practice, and then we do cutoffs and relays. And when you do cutoffs and relays first, and then we go to whatever else. So we get out there the first day of spring training with Lou, we do cutoffs and relays, and we screw up the very first play, and Lou went off. I mean, went off. We're all looking at each other, holy cow, this guy's pretty serious about this stuff. So. But he was the right guy at the right time for us.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that he told you and all your teammates in that first gathering that, as I recall, there was a little more to it.
Well, he introduced his coaches, and before we went left to break out to go do, spring training, he said, "Second of all, I'm here to win. I don't care if you like me."
And he said, I'm not going to do anything to cause you to like me, because I don't care. And he went on to say, to Pete's credit, that he had studied the tape from the last couple of seasons and concluded that the team's better than it had played, and
Correct.
Therefore he was going to impel you all to play up to your level. And it's a year, as Reds fans know, it's a year that the team went wire to wire in first place. And as we noted earlier, there was an expectation that Oakland would sweep the team.
Well, if you remember the Sports Illustrated issue, it was a big Oakland A's sign, and then in the very right-hand corner it said Reds. That's how much advantage they were giving Oakland.
Now, historians say that what did the trick was Eric Davis hitting a home run the beginning of the first game.
Yeah, that was cool as hell.
And the attitudes, apparently, it's been written that the attitude within the team was the signal. You all decided, that's it. Eric Davis, extraordinary athlete, knocks that ball out of the park. The Oakland fans are stunned because it occurred in Oakland.
No, it was here.
How did you all feel? How did you feel?
Oh, let me tell you, because it was Dave Stewart. I actually went to when Oakland came into town. I actually was outside in the dugout watching them take batting practice, and I had probably seen 3 red seat home runs in my life, batting practice and games combined. like 5 of their players were hitting nothing but red seat home runs. So I'm like, oh my God, these guys are incredible. But like Lou said, we had the nasty boys in the bullpen, so all we needed was a lead and going into the 7th inning, and that game was ours. And he knew that we had enough good starting pitching to beat this team. Now Jose at that time was probably the hottest pitcher in baseball, and he actually won 2 of those 4 games. But Lou knew that all we had to do was get a lead, and we had such a good athletic team. Eric obviously was our leader, but when he went down, the guys stepped up. Barry was there, and Hatch had like, how many hits in a row kind of thing. It was just in the cards. But like I said, Lou knew once we beat Pittsburgh, because that was really the playoff, because they had as good a pitching staff as we did, except we had a little bit better bullpen. But he knew that whoever won coming out of the National League was probably going to win the World Series. So,
Tom, what advice, given your lifetime of experience, what advice do you offer to young people in any sport with respect to how they should develop, and while you're at it, should they do their homework, as their parents say?
Yeah, but I mean, there's not a teacher more thorough than experience. Until you're out there, I used to tell my kids, and I used to, the pitching coordinator used to hate me when I'd tell this story or talk about it. But you will learn so much more out there by competing and getting in the middle of the game than you're ever going to learn from any of us coaches. We can tell you what, about certain things, whatever, but until you're out there and you're able to trust your stuff and go out there with what we're trying to, I'm trying to tell these guys, your stuff's good enough. You have to believe that it's good enough. So my job, like I said, and I was fortunate as a kid coming up in an organization. They never tried to change anything on me. They never, because they thought that what I had and what I brought to the table was good enough. But nowadays they try and change some things, and they want guys to do something different. They're infatuated with the radar gun. But I can tell you right now, if you got a guy like Frank Tanana throwing 78 miles an hour, and I saw him break plenty of bats, or you got a guy throwing 98 miles an hour, the hitter will tell you how you're doing. The hitter will always be the barometer. And I've seen Jamie Moyer, Frank Tanana, guys that didn't throw exceptionally hard, dominate games. So, but what we had going into the 90 World Series is we had some really good starting pitching, and we had a nasty ass bullpen. Unhittable bullpen.
Tom, you've had a storied life experience. As noted earlier, you've got 38 years left, and
how did you know I want to live to be 100?
And you're the lovely woman with whom you had the 10-minute 5 children plan left us unexpectedly a month ago at age 62, and our heartfelt sympathies obviously are to be conveyed to you, but also in the context of you did something that's historic by definition, that almost no one else has ever done, and pause, we love you.
Thank you, Jackson. Thank you all for having me here. I think my grandson Nicholas is over there with his buddy, his teammate Sam Martin, so.
All right.
Come join our 361 firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.